His body was built, he was gorgeous and glorious. What more could you want?
I spent a lot of time with David, and he used to say, when I found Mick Ronson, I found my Jeff Beck.
Mick Ronson wasn't supposed to be a rock star. In fact, he wasn't supposed to be anything other than the guy marking the lines on Hull's municipal football pitches. That's where David Bowie's drummer John Cambridge found him in 1970, standing in the middle of the field with a bucket of lime and a look of quiet concentration. He was marking out the football pitch, Cambridge later recalled, as though the image of Ronson with his guitar slung over his back like a musketeer might somehow erase the banality of that moment. It's a tale that's been retold so many times it feels almost apocryphal, but it wasn't. That's just the thing about Mick Ronson. For all the grandeur and glamour that would later surround him, he never quite left the football pitch behind. This is what made him such a unique force in rock music. Ronson wasn't a peacock, not by nature. He wasn't a showman in the same way as Bowie, whose Ziggy Stardust persona seemed to radiate from some alien star system where theatricality is oxygen. Ronson was earthy, rooted, and yet somehow larger than life precisely because he wasn't trying to be. His playing did all the talking, and when you hear those searing Les Paul lines on Moon Age Daydream, you're not thinking about his hair or his outfits. You're thinking, who the hell is this? And how did he get so good? The answer, of course, starts in Hull, a city not exactly synonymous with glam rock or anything remotely resembling glamour. Born in 1946, Ronson grew up in an unremarkable northern neighbourhood, the kind of place where dreams of rock stardom were about as realistic as a Martian invasion. His family was working class, and his childhood was unremarkable, save for one crucial detail. He had a knack for music. As a child, he trained on the piano and recorder, displaying an early aptitude that suggested he might have a future in classical music, but then he heard Duane Eddy. That was it. Game over. The moment Ronson heard the twang of Eddie's guitar, he was hooked.
The early bands, well, I kind of started off in bands where we would play Everly Brothers songs and Beatles songs, and later on that kind of progressed to more like a blues band or something, you know.
Classical music was shoved unceremoniously to the side, and the guitar became his new obsession. He joined local bands like the Mariners and the Cresters, where his talent was impossible to miss. By the time he joined the Rats, he was already something of a local legend. Mick was the best guitarist in Hull, said Benny Marshall, the Rats' lead singer, with a mixture of admiration and lingering resentment. So when he left to head down south and join Bowie, I was pretty upset. Marshall wasn't the only one who noticed Ronson's talent. Bowie had heard about him through Cambridge, who'd returned to Hull with specific instructions: find Mick Ronson and bring him to London. It wasn't exactly an offer Ronson could refuse. At the time, Bowie was still more of an ambitious oddity than a global superstar, but he had enough clout to make Ronson feel like this might be his big break. And so, the football pitches were left behind, and Mick Ronson headed south to change the face of rock music forever.
The first impressions of David was like, it was very straightforward. It was always really straightforward. He knew what he wanted to do, and he sort of got on and did it, you know. And that's what I kind of remember most of him, you know, most about him. And he was, quite a giving sort of person too, you know, a very kind person. And that's what really struck me about him. And also you knew he was going to be, you weren't here messing about, you know, he was going to be somebody, you know. You can kind of tell that off somebody, you know, you get that off some people and you don't get it off other people. He was one that you definitely got that vibe with. You know, he was going to be a star or something, you know, right away.
The pairing of Bowie and Ronson was electric from the start. Where Bowie was all androgynous grace and experimental chaos, Ronson was the anchor, a steadying force with a guitar that could shred, wail, or soar depending on what the moment demanded. Together they created something entirely new, glam rock, a genre that would go on to define an era. Ronson's contributions to Bowie's music can't be overstated. It was Ronson who turned Bowie's ideas into fully realized arrangements, who gave the songs their muscle and edge. Listen to the rise and fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars, and you'll hear Ronson everywhere. From the iconic riff of Suffragette City to the soaring solos on Starman, his fingerprints are all over it. Bowie might have been the face of Ziggy Stardust, but Ronson was the beating heart.
But the Ziggy Stardust riff, it's the same thing, you know, there's just plugged in and turn the amp up and...
Of course, it wasn't just Bowie who benefited from Ronson's talents. In 1972, he co-produced Lou Reed's Transformer, one of the most iconic albums of the decade. It was Ronson who arranged the strings on Perfect Day and Satellite of Love, transforming what might have been simple pop songs into something timeless.
I came from Miami, FLA.
The thing with Ronno is I could very rarely understand a word he said. He had a whole accent. Boy, Ronson's good. Wow.
Reed, who wasn't exactly known for lavishing praise, later called Ronson one of the finest musicians I ever worked with. But Ronson's talents went beyond the technical. He had a rare ability to connect with other musicians, to bring out the best in them without overshadowing them. It's a skill that's often overlooked in discussions of his career, but it's one of the reasons he was so successful. Whether he was playing alongside Bowie, Reed, or even Bob Dylan during the Rolling Thunder Revue, Ronson always knew exactly what the music needed, and he delivered. And yet, for all his success, Ronson remained remarkably grounded. This was a man who, despite sharing the stage with some of the biggest names in rock history, never lost the humility that came from his northern roots. It's what made him so relatable, so human. Even at the height of his fame, he was still the guy who'd been marking out the lines on a football pitch not so long ago. One of the most fascinating aspects of Ronson's career is the way he managed to blend his influences into something entirely his own. He was a magpie, picking up bits and pieces from the guitarists he admired and weaving them into his playing. Eddie Cochran, George Harrison, Hank Marvin, they all left their mark on him. But it was Jeff Beck who had the biggest impact. Ronson's admiration for Beck bordered on obsession.
And influences, I guess, like guitar-wise, I used to like listening to Eddie Cochran, George Harrison, you know, Hank Marvin. The Shadows was one of the earliest ones, you know, because I was always a big melody lover. I used to play classical music, classical piano, and I used to play violin. And I was always fond of a good melody, you know. And Jeff Beck, I used to like Jeff Beck, you know, early on. Still do.
In 1968, when the Rats supported Beck at the Cat Ballou in Grantham, Ronson couldn't resist approaching his hero. He asked Beck to show him the fast run at the beginning of Beck's Boogie, Marshall recalled, so Beck plays it, and Mick says, "No, play it slower." Beck said, "If I play it any slower, I'll stop." But he was patient, and Mick learnt that riff. This anecdote captures so much about Ronson, his determination, his humility, and his willingness to learn. He wasn't afraid to admit he didn't know something, and he wasn't too proud to ask for help. It's a quality that served him well throughout his career, allowing him to grow and evolve as a musician. The influence of Beck's playing is evident in Ronson's work, particularly in the way he used the guitar as a storytelling tool. Like Beck, Ronson understood that a guitar solo wasn't just about showing off, it was about emotion, about conveying something that couldn't be put into words. His solos weren't just technically impressive, they were emotionally resonant, filled with a depth and nuance that set him apart from his peers. Ronson and Beck's paths crossed again in 1973, when Beck joined Bowie and Ronson on stage for a performance of the Jean Genie. It was a moment that felt almost symbolic. a passing of the torch from one generation of guitarists to the next. Beck's influence on Ronson was undeniable, but by this point, Ronson had become an icon in his own right, a guitarist whose style and skill were every bit as distinctive as those of his heroes. Despite his success, Ronson's career was not without its challenges. His relationship with Bowie, while creatively fruitful, was often strained. David needs someone around him to say, "F off, you're stupid," Ronson once said, with a candor that likely didn't endear him to his famously thin-skinned collaborator. He needs one person who won't bow to him. This tension eventually led to a falling out, and Ronson went on to pursue a solo career that never quite reached the heights of his work with Bowie. It's one of the great tragedies of his life that he never received the recognition he deserved during his lifetime, and yet Ronson's influence is undeniable. You can hear it in the music of countless artists who came after him, from glam rock to punk to alternative. His playing, his arrangements, his approach to music, they all left an indelible mark on the industry. Mick Ronson may not have been a showman, but he didn't need to be. His music spoke for itself, and it continues to do so, decades after his death. For those who knew him, who worked with him, who watched him turn a riff into something transcendent, there's no question about his place in rock history. He was the real deal.
Not only was he a great guitarist, he was also a very imaginative arranger when it came to strings and brass, like some of the stuff he did for David at the end of 5 years. Just what he writes for strings, it's absolutely bizarre. And some of the stuff he did on the Transformer album with Lou Reed was just... I don't know anyone else that would have come up with stuff like that.
A guitarist who could do it all and then some. And maybe, just maybe, somewhere out there, he's still trying to perfect Beck's boogie, not because he has to, but because he wouldn't have it any other way.